Well, welcome everyone to Handler University. My name is Sabrina Poth. I am the specialist in marketing order services with the Almond Board of California, and I'd like to welcome you as well again for joining us at this early morning session at the Almond Conference 2021. Now, this session is for either new almond industry members that maybe could be confused about the forms and marketing order requirements, or perhaps you just need a refresher and you've already been in this industry for some time. I see some familiar faces out in the audience. In today's session, we'll help you make sense of those various forms, programs, and verifications and other requirements which make the Almond Board Conference or compliance, activities more aware of. We'll save some time at the end of the session for some questions for our speaker this morning. If you're too shy to maybe answer or ask those questions during the after the presentation, you have that time to speak with the speaker afterwards as well on one-on-one. So we'll get started here. So Industry Service Department, where we operate. There are 5 major areas of our department that we conduct. And first off, quality and safety. Now, providing tools and resources for maximizing almond quality and safety throughout shelf life, as well as addressing regulatory issues. We have reporting, compliance, and assessments, ensuring that you, the handlers, understand marketing order services requirements as well as obligations. Collecting industry data, processing, and providing industry receipts, as well as preparing handlers for assessment and compliance cases. Now, crop forecast and surveys, very important in our industry as well. Engaging the industry and third party to conduct industry crop, acreage survey, and ensuring the transparent sharing of the data, which is very vital to our industry. Industry programs and management, managing those functional and technical aspects of voluntary as well as mandatory programs. And lastly, industry support, providing the industry with that support needed of the programs as well as facilitating almond trade issues. And these are all important aspects of the industry services at the Almond Board, and we would like to provide you with all of the help that we could possibly give you. So with further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. He is the Manager of Marketing Order Services, Mr. Bryce Spicer.
Thanks, Sabrina, and good morning, everyone. Before we move on, I just want to introduce the team. Sometimes we come to these things and you work with somebody and you know the name, but you don't know the face. You've met Sabrina here, so Sabrina is very involved, on our quality and safety side. She does a lot of the verifications for the pre-export check program, the handler treatment plans. We've got Tony Arlanos in the back there. Maybe those of you have emailed Tony for your 72-hour notices before, or InShow Credits, or a whole host of other things. Judy Scott McKay is sitting next to Tony. Judy, you probably worked with if you're a DV user or a custom processor, anything on the pasteurization side of things. So just a great team, and as Sabrina was saying, we really take the services part to big deal in our department. We really see ourselves as a service to you, the handlers, and so if we can ever be of service to you, please let us know. We're happy to do that. I want to just first congratulate you for making it here. First session on Thursday, it's early in the morning, and I appreciate you being here. I want to cover off, you're stuck with me for the duration of this time today, but we're going to try to make it fun. I've got some things mixed in here, and we're really going to cover kind of from beginning to end what the compliance programs are for the Almond Board. And I'll say this, you don't feel like you need to take any notes. As they said, they're going to make these recordings available later. And also, there's a lot of stuff that we'll cover, but hopefully at the end you'll just remember a few things. And again, please reach out to any of us on staff and we'll be happy to help you. So first, as far as the roadmap for today, we're going to talk about first what does it mean to become a handler. Maybe you're a grower in the audience or you're thinking about becoming a handler, don't even know what that means. We'll cover that. We'll talk about some of the annual, quarterly, and monthly requirements, and then some other like at occurrence type requirements. Because there are a few different forms. People always will say, oh, there's so many different forms for different things. So we're going to try to clear that up a little bit. So hopefully, you'll have a little more familiarity with some of the forms. Inedible dispositions, InShow credits, and a host of other things. So let's jump right in. And as Sabrina said, there'll be time probably for a little bit of questions at the end. If you'd rather ask the questions at a later time or send us an email, we'll have our email information at the end of the presentation. There's a lot of words on this slide. I'm not going to read them all, but essentially everything we do in marking order services, essentially, surprise, surprise, comes from the marking order, right? So the Almond marking order was enacted in 1950, and essentially all of the compliance activities come from that document. I've just pulled out two sections here, the section on what it means to be a handler and what it means to handle. Essentially what it means to be a handler is it means you're someone who's putting almonds into trade. And by that I mean not necessarily there isn't an exemption for a grower who is putting less than 150 pounds per day at a roadside stand or at a certified farmer's market. That would be a different classification. But essentially anybody else who's wanting to take California almonds and enter them into trade, by definition you're going to be a handler, and that's when all the marking order requirements would begin. If we look at the next slide here, how do you become a handler? It's really not overly complicated. There's essentially what we call a Form 42, and I'll talk about that later, but it's a one-page form, and it essentially tells us a little bit about your business, the name of your entity, a little bit of the ownership structure, your contact information, and then there's typically a trade source list that goes along with that, helps us to populate our supplier and exporter list on our website. Because as you probably know, there's a list on our website of all registered handlers in the state. We also require you to submit what's called a handler treatment plan, and Sabrina's your gal for this, but what is a handler treatment plan? It's essentially your plan that documents how you're going to be in compliance with the pasteurization rule. Well, what's the pasteurization rule, right? Many of you may know this, you may not, but we have a outgoing treatment rule, so all almonds that are sold into the North American market, meaning US, Canada, Mexico, have to be treated to at least a 4-log reduction for salmonella. And so your handler treatment plan is essentially saying how you're going to comply with that plan. One, if you're going to ship North America, and then two, if you're going to have a custom processor, which is like a pasteurizer for hire, if you're going to use one of those, or if you have something in-house that's been validated, this is your plan that documents how you're going to label, track, and process your almonds in accordance with the pasteurization rule. And then finally, once you have all the documents set together, you're ready to become a handler, but obviously if you never have an incoming, if you never bring almonds in and you don't handle almonds, you're not a handler. So the last step to becoming a handler is actually handling an almond. So what we define as that is having an incoming receipt. The marking order requires that all almonds, when a grower grows them, and prior to them being sorted and sized at the processor, have to be sampled. It's typically called a USDA inspection, or you'll see if you're a grower note sheet that accompanies it. We call that an incoming. When a handler has an incoming into their name, then they're handling. And so that kind of completes the process. And it's at that time when all the next reporting requirements that we'll cover kind of begin. So I've got a few of these kind of popped in here, a little pop quiz time. You don't have to answer, you can think about it in your head, but it kind of breaks up a lot of the other kind of a lot of information slides. So all almonds grown in California are covered by the federal marking order. True or false? Well, that of course is true. So the marking order only does cover almonds grown in California. Now, California does make up virtually 100% of all almonds grown in the US, and as we know, or you probably heard here at this conference, almonds from the US make up about 80 or a little over 80% of the worldwide supply. But that's an important piece. So the marking order is for California almonds. Here's a bonus question. Now, you've probably heard about almonds possibly being grown in other states. Arizona, you've heard some in western Idaho. Are those subject to the federal marking order requirements? I just said almonds grown in California are subject. Well, how about this? True and false, right? Don't you love when there's not just one answer? It depends. We went to USDA and asked this question. And really what it depends on is if they're commingled with California almonds. And so if almonds that are grown in Arizona are totally kept separate and segregated, they actually, because they're not grown in California, not subject to the marking order requirements. But what we found is that at the quantities that they're typically grown right now, they are often commingled and therefore would be subject to the same rules that almonds coming from California are. If you've got questions about that, again, contact us directly. So let's hop right in here. We'll keep moving along. Monthly, quarterly, annual, and other requirements. So first we're going to talk about the monthly things. This is what people often will think of when they think of the handler requirements. Before we do that, I just want to give a quick plug here. Some of those that are handlers already in the audience, hopefully you're familiar with the handler portal. So this was developed probably about 6 or 7 years ago now. And really the intent with our handler portal, I know we all have a million passwords we have to remember for everything from the newspaper you subscribe to whatever. I'm not trying to give you another password and username to remember, but the nice thing about this is everything that you do for the Almond Board from a compliance standpoint can all be in one place. It's all behind a login, so it can be specifically your information. And so what you can do at the handler portal, you can view the operations calendar, which talks about all these different deadlines that I'll talk about. You can submit those forms, those monthly forms, those quarterly assessment forms. You can see your quality control report, which tells you what your incomings are, tells you what your inedible obligation is. And actually recently, we just built this out, you can get billing information. So you can get your invoices and statements from the Almond Board, also update your billing contacts. That can all be done through the handler portal now. And we're really excited. We've got a team that works on this every year, and we try to continually build out more and more things into this handler portal. And then lastly, there's a reference material. So if you're looking for that thing from the Almond Board that you need for your buyer, and you're like, I don't know where it is, I can't find it on the Almond Board website, check the reference material section out of our handler portal. There's a lot of things a lot of PDFs and a lot of informational backgrounder type stuff that we put there that might be of help. Think of like a pesticide management fact sheet or a metals letter or a non-GMO statement, something like this that your buyer may be requesting that you don't know where it is on the Almond Board. Check the handler portal out, specifically the reference material. Again, we aim this to be like a one-stop shop for you. So let's jump into the monthly forms. These are things you're telling us, first, form 1, your received almonds. So it's a requirement that all handlers have to report how many almonds they're bringing in from growers for over the period of the month. And all these forms, forms 1, 25-1, and 25-2, our monthly forms, are due on the 5th of every month. So if you haven't done your November forms, they were due on the 5th of December. I'd love you if you could turn those in. But anyway, the whole idea here is the 5th of every month, you submit for the month previous. So that gives you from the close, end of the month, 1st through the 5th to kind of submit those. They're always due on the 5th, whether it's a Monday, Tuesday, Sunday, whatever. Remember, you can submit them all electronically through the handler portal. You can do it from anywhere with an internet connection that you have your username and password. So not that I think you should be doing your forms on vacation, but you could if you wanted to. Hopefully you get them done before you go on vacation. One quick thing I'll say here, all we ask you to do is report receipts, total them by variety, and always report kernel weights, total kernel weights. So that means inedible plus edible weights together. Sometimes people will say, well, do I just report the edible kernel weights that are coming from my USDA note sheets? It's actually edible plus inedible. It's called total kernels. Let's see here. Again, this is just by current period, so you'll have 12 Form 1s that will be submitted each year, one for our crop year starts August 1 and finishes July 31, so surprise, surprise, period 1 is the month of August to the month of September, and so on through July, which would be period 12. When you do go there, you can see there's a little bit of a screenshot on the right-hand side. It just is a simple list of varieties down the left-hand side, and then you have the current period where you would add, and it would actually take your values so you input and automatically add them to any prior period you had, and it gives you your year-to-date and keeps that updated. So I get this question, I don't see the variety. I received I'm going to make this up, a 247XY experimental variety, and it's not on the list. Where do I put it? Well, probably before you call me and say, let's add that to the list, check down here under other variety, and sorry, it's a little fuzzy on the screen to see, but there is this drop down. So we have like a default list and then kind of an other variety list. You can check that. If you find it, you put your weight in here under current period, then you click add variety, and that will come up to your default list, and because you'll have year-to-date pounds, it'll stay there for the rest of the year. All right, I talked about this. Total inedible kernels received should be claimed by variety on a handler's form 1. Remember, that's false, right? Not just edibles, edibles plus inedible. Total kernels is what we're looking for on the Form 1. So if you have questions about that, feel reach out to us. Remember what day are the forms due? We can all say it together. The 5th, right? The 5th of every month. So, not that, there's a lot of dates to remember, but if you can just always think about on the 5th of every month, that's when all these 3 forms that we're just going to talk about right now, monthly, are due. So we talked about Form 1. Let's talk about Form 2, or 25-1 rather. And 25.1 is where we talk about total shipments. And we ask you always to claim shipments by product type. And the Almond Board has 4 product types. And I should say, if you're a handler in here and you're responsible for submitting these monthly forms and you forget everything I say today, I won't hold it against you. We're covering a lot of ground. But there is this hyperlink at the top where it says View Form 25.1 Instructions. We try to have these on each of our forms. It'll help you, like if you can't remember what is the shelled versus manufactured versus products, a lot of that information is available in that hyperlink there, instructions. But real quickly, shelled is what you'd think of, brown skin almonds, right? Natural almonds. Manufactured when you mechanically alter the almonds, so think blanched, sliced, diced. Products is when you use almonds as an ingredient. We don't see a lot of pounds claimed this way. A lot of times, chocolate covered almonds, those kind of things are gonna happen further on down the value chain, not necessarily at the handler level. And then InShow is quite popular as well. So if you're shipping InShow out, we just ask that you'd claim the net kernel weight, not the total weight. You also would add your domestic and export shipments together here. Remember, this is total shipments. There is a spot where you can submit for inter-handler transfers. We'll talk about this later, but if you're buying almonds from another registered handler, we actually ask that you claim them as received here. It will reduce your net shipment. That way, when they show it as a shipment to you, your net reduction in net shipments would offset that amount. That way we don't count 1 pound if it's shipped between handlers twice and then ultimately shipped again. We don't count 1 pound shipped as 3 pounds. Although that'd make our shipment numbers look good, wouldn't really be truthful. So make sure you claim your inter-handler transfers received here, industry purchases, which would be the same inbound product, but just from a different origin instead of coming from another processor. It'd be coming from a broker or someone like that. And then lastly, exempt and edible shipments. We'll talk about those in a little bit. So Form 25.1, total shipments. Think domestic, export, added together by product type. And then at the bottom, there is a section for what we call commitments. So those of you who have looked at the position report, you'll see what's committed, total commitments. All these numbers that you see on the position report, if you look at that monthly, they all come from you. So the position report is just an aggregation of each of these 3 forms that are submitted each month. And so that's why I can't overstate the importance of you guys turning your forms in on time, because we can't publish a position report if we don't get the forms from you guys. So we really thank you for submitting those. But commitments is what hasn't happened yet, but will happen in the future. So think like contracts for sale. We ask you to split these up to 3 different types here. Domestic, so if it's a future domestic sale that you have on the books, or non-contract. These are less common. Think of like, let's say some folks might have a little bit of a storefront where they sell, 5,000 pounds a year through the front of their store, pasteurized almonds. They may claim that as a non-contract commitment, but typically handlers won't claim much here. And then export, right? We would ask you to separate out your domestic commitments versus your export commitments. If you don't know where they're going, we ask you to, just to the best of your knowledge, claim what you can. Unlike shipments, which will carry over in future periods, commitments don't. It's just a snapshot in time. At this point in time, what do you have on the books for domestic in the future? What do you have on the books for export in the future? Contracts of purchase is just the inverse of that. What do you have that you're buying in the future? We ask you to split it up, domestic, export. You might say, well, what's an export contract for purchase? This is it's pretty rare, but California almonds that are overseas that you're buying in the future that are coming back. So we don't see that claimed oftentimes, but just want to let you know what that is. Okay, InShow shipments should be claimed in net kernel weight after applying a crack-out percentage. True or false? What do we think? It's true, right, exactly. Can't emphasize this enough. So if you're shipping, a load that's 45,000 pounds total weight InShow, it may only be, 35,750 pounds of kernel weight, right? It's that 35,750 that we want you to claim in our forms. We don't want you to claim that 45,000 pounds. The shell weight we don't capture in our numbers. Okay, we're done with Form 25.1. This is the last monthly form. So whereas 25.1 was total shipments, here we are just exports. So I get this question all the time. Bryce, I can't see, where is the United States on my Form 25.2? And I always kind of joke and I said, yeah, you're not going to find it, right? So this is just export. So how do you claim a domestic shipment to the Almond Board? Well, 25.1 is total shipments, 25.2 is export. We calculate the domestic shipments by taking your 25.1, your total shipments, and subtracting your export shipments. Same thing here. We ask you to claim them by product type. Remember, we have 4 product types that you claim: shelled, manufactured, products, and in-shell. Again, no domestic should be included here. If you don't see your destination, just like that variety one, we have a default list. The industry ships to nearly 100 countries, and so it's hard to put all those on the list, on the page. So we have kind of more the top major list, and then we have a more minor list at the bottom. If you don't see it on the default list, check at the bottom for other destinations, include what by product type, what the weight is, add that variety, and then again, because you'll have year-to-date pounds, it'll be there for the rest of the year. Shipment totals can be larger on 25.2 than 25.1. What do you guys think? False, right? How do we have more export shipments than we have total shipments? I get this question oftentimes, and actually now that our system is all submitted electronically, it'll kind of get mad at you, and it'll say error, InShow correlation error or something like that if it's an InShow. Because again, remember the thought is on 25.1 you're claiming all your shipments, on 25.2 your exports. So if you tell me you've shipped 10,000 pounds total for the month, and then you say, oh no, but I shipped 20,000 pounds to Japan, the system goes, well, how's that possible? You know, you told me you only sent 10. So your 25.2 should be, if you did all domestic, should be the same by product type, or if you have a little bit of domestic, it should be a little less. U.S. shipments are claimed by product type on the Form 25.2. Remember, it's only for export, so that'd be false. All right, we're done with the monthly shipments. We'll keep moving along here, or monthly reports, that is. Let's talk about quarterly things. You know, I sometimes joke, people say, well, you know, are there busy times a year? And I certainly know for you guys, there are very much as busy times a year. For a lot of the Almond Board requirements, they're very cyclical. It's kind of like an operations type thing. So we've talked about the monthly requirements, and then quarterly, we have a few different things, first of which is our assessment. Remember, the Almond Board is funded through a grower assessment that's billed 4 times a year. It's billed on November 30th, January 31st, April 30th, and August 31st. We call those assessments 1, 2, 3, and 4. Three of the 4 are based on what's called a Form 2 or redetermination report, and we'll look at that in a slide here soon. The first assessment, assessment number 1, which was just billed a week and a half ago, that's actually based on Form 1. And people say, well, why do you do that? Why is the first one different? Well, truthfully, it's because what's happening at the end of October at handler facilities? It's craziness, right? You guys are getting tons of stuff coming in. It's typically one of the largest shipping months. And so rather than trying to figure out a redetermination report where your inventories are changing every day, we just run your assessment based on what you say you've received by the end of October 31st. But for the 3 other assessments, we actually have a redetermination report. And you can access all of this. Again, this is a screenshot on the bottom. At the handler portal, you would just click assessments, and then depending on what period of the quarterly period we're in, you'll see the appropriate information listed below. Here is that Form 2, we call it, redetermination report. A couple things I'll highlight. It tells you what crop year it is, and it tells you what the reporting period is. So because this is a 17, and this is just an example we put together, but 17-18 is a crop year here. And then because this says August 1st through July 31st, what is this telling us? This is the whole crop year, right? So this is actually a final assessment, or what we would call assessment number 4. And I won't spend a ton of time here because a lot of times there's very specific questions on this. But essentially, when you work down to line 11 there that you see your assessable weight, that is the number that your invoice is calculated off of that you receive from the Almond Board. People always say, well, I get this invoice from the Almond Board, but how is that number calculated? Well, depending on what, and I've got a slide later on this, but depending on what assessment you're in, it's all driven by that line 11 assessable weight. And lines 1 through 10 is how we arrive there, right? So we take your inventory, what you have at the end of this reporting period. In this case, this handler, this example, this is their inventory at the end of July. Their net shipments, so what they've shipped for the year. We get that subtotal, and then we obviously back out any carry-in you had from the previous year because you've already paid an assessment on that last year, so there's no reason to do that again. Any inedible obligation that we assume you're going to dispose of, we'll talk about that in a little bit, that will come off. And then lines 9 and 10 are if you do inter-handler transfers between other registered handlers and you want to move the assessment around. These are the 2 where that would be allowed for. So we'll touch on that a bit later, and then that finally works down to line 11. Some other possible adjustments to assessment invoices. We are required from the marketing order to have every handler will get audited at least once every 3 years. There's sometimes can be an audit adjustment. So we'll hire a third-party CPA. He'll come in and look at your books at a scheduled time. If he determines that the previous year's assessment was under or overpaid, you'll have either a credit or a deficit added to the next assessment for your invoicing. So that you can see, sometimes you'll see what we call an audit adjustment on your invoice. If you have more questions about that, reach out to Tony or I, and we'd be happy to explain it or help you understand it. And then lastly, there's two other ways that that are actually ways to reduce your your assessment invoice. And both of them, what I like to explain is there's obviously the Almond Board assessment is 3 cents per pound, but it's split into a 40% administrative assessment and 60% marketing portion of the assessment. So really the 3 cents you can think of as 1.2% that's for administrative fees and 1.8 cents a pound that's for marketing. And that 1.8 cents for marketing, there's ways to access that or to reduce some of that. Firstly, if you handle organic almonds, the Almond Board is not allowed to specifically market organic almonds. We market almonds in general. So as such, if you do handle organic almonds and want an exemption from the marketing portion of the assessment for those pounds, you can file an organic exemption. We'll talk about this in a second. There's a form you have to submit prior to the year starting, and then each quarter you just tell us how many pounds you have that are organic, and you'll get the 60% or the 1.8 cents off for those pounds. And then the other way to access the marketing portion is you can do what's called a credit back program. So if you do your own promotion activities, you can actually file for a portion of what you spend back in what we call a credit back. There's a number of different rules that go along with that, and obviously some guidelines required. I put a colleague of ours, Rahima Kanari's email on the slide here. She's the gal to reach out to. If you have questions on that, you can always reach out to us and we can explain it further. Organic exemption, again, this is for 100% certified organic almonds. If you're a handler that has organic and conventional, you can access the organic exemption for the organic portion of your handle. But again, you would have to submit this application you see here, which is SC 649. It's required to be submitted by July 1st of each year. So it's too late to apply for the 21-22 year, but be thinking about that for the future if you do handle organic almonds or if you have growers that deliver you organic almonds. Here's the invoicing schedule, and you're probably not going to be able to read those numbers on the bottom here, but again, assessment 1 is for the reporting period of August 1st through October 31st, so that's our A1. You can see in the example I have here below, often what will happen is that assessable weight, or that line 11 on that form 2 that drives our invoice calculation, will be increasing, especially from assessment 1 to assessment 2. And the reason for that is this simple. You're still receiving almonds in November and December, right? And so the amount of pounds is changing. And you can see that in an example here. In this example, this handler has 2.5 million pounds they've received by the end of October. That jumps to 4.5 million pounds by the end of December, and finally it kind of crests at 5 million pounds by assessment 3. You pay a quarter or 25% of your total assessment quarterly. So assessment 1 is 25% of your total obligation. Assessment 2, you pay up to 50% of your total obligation, but remember your assessable weight can change. So you can see the actual invoice in this example was $18,750 for assessment 1. It jumps to $48,750 for assessment 2 because the assessable weight went up by 2 million pounds. And you're paying 50% of, at that time, what is a total obligation amount of $135,000. And this is what we typically see. For most handlers, assessment 2 is the largest invoice that you'll receive from the Almond Board because you're kind of catching up from what's been received. And then after that, usually assessments 3 and 4 are very similar. If you have questions on that, again, reach out to us. One thing I want to stress, these invoices come out, you have 15 days till the due date. And then after 30 days, interest at 1.5% monthly starts accruing on the 31st day. And it's calculated daily. So a lot of incentive here to pay, if you can, on time. There is a 10% penalty that is on the 60th day for any outstanding balances. So we try to do a good job of reminding folks if they find themselves in those areas. We know that you guys are busy. So if you have questions, we've got a new email address, accountsreceivable@almondboard.com. I encourage you to reach out, send an email. We have folks from our staff and also from our accounting staff that do that monitor that inbox. I just want to make sure we're on time here. So let's transition to something else. This is a new thing, and I'm really excited about this. So for a long time, you would just get an invoice in the mail, in the snail mail. And if it didn't get delivered, well, that just was that. And so what we've tried to do is provide more things available electronically to you. And the first thing here is you have the ability now to update your billing listing. So sometimes we'll have handlers that will have multiple facilities and will want their invoices to go one place, but that may not be where their address is of record for everything else. You have now the ability to edit your billing invoice if that's of interest to you. And you do so by clicking on your handler name. Once you're logged into the handler portal, you'll be taken here to handler information. You can add a location, and then what's really important, and I think I've got it here, whichever one you select as accounts payable as the role, ABC role, that's the one that will be used for invoicing and statements and all that. So again, you can, when you get home from the conference or when you have time and you want to check this out, you can see what's listed now. You can make an update yourself or contact us and we can help you there. We're really excited about this. And then also, kind of in that same area under the billing tab, you'll be able to see any invoices and statements. And actually now, again, click on your handler name, then click on billing, and then you'll see invoices and statements. And now you'll actually get an email copy of your invoices and statements as well. So you'll get a paper copy and a soft copy as well to the email address associated in the handler portal. Pop quiz, a 10% late payment penalty is applied on the 60th day from the assessment invoice date. True. So again, just want to make sure, again, 60 days, want to just make sure you're paying the minimum amount on the assessment side. If you have questions, accounts receivable at almondboard.com. Almond Board invoices and statements are available electronically through the handler portal. So if I was giving this presentation a year ago, I would have said no. But today, I can say yes, they are. So again, encourage you to use that. You can update your accounts payable handler address. You can get your soft copies of your invoices and statements. It's just a great spot. It's all stored there for you. And going forward, it'll keep them in there for forever. So you'll be able to see past ones if that's of interest to you. Quick plug here, our system does send the emails from this kind of email address here that some inboxes will recognize as spam. If you are the person who's a billing contact at your facility, just maybe add this to your safe senders list. It'll come from accounts receivable at almondboard.com, and it's sent through this system at sent-via.netsuite.com. Feel free to contact us, but if you don't, sometimes if folks don't make that a safe sender, what will happen is it'll just go straight to the junk mail. Again, it'll come out on those dates, November 30th, the invoice. Statements come out typically on or near the first of each month. They're monthly. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground. Hopefully you're still with me. We got a little bit more time. Thank you again for your attendance today. We're going to talk a little bit about the annual requirements. So we talked about monthly, we talked about quarterly, and you're like, man, how many more requirements are there? Well, there's not too many more, but we're going to talk a little bit about some of the annual. I spoke earlier about the Form 42. We're going to talk about that. The grower list, what we use that for, and then handler treatment plan, which we alluded to earlier. Here is the Form 42. Remember I mentioned earlier, it's just a one-page form. Hopefully it doesn't look too scary up there. This is all it is, and actually you don't have to fill out every line depending on how if you're an incorporation or a partnership. Again, very basic information, handler name, address, telephone, fax number, that kind of stuff, and a signature on the bottom. These are due by July 31st of each year. Remember, we need them in advance of the year that would start the next day on August 1st. Or if you're becoming a handler for the first time, we ask that you submit this prior to doing any handling. And again, you can submit this to myself or to the compliance fax number on the top. I don't know if people fax anymore, but email it to me, email it to Tony or anybody in our team, and we'll get you taken care of. Or call us and we'll help you out. Grower lists. What are grower lists? Well, you guys may not realize this, but every handler every year submits their grower list to the Almond Board, and really the purpose is for our election purposes. Hopefully you've gotten a chance to meet some of the board of directors that are walking around here. The Almond Board has a host of, has 20 board members, 10 members, 10 alternates, and those elections are done through, the only way we can get those elections done is by receiving your grower list so that we can make sure the ballots go out to all growers. And then also every 5 years there is a referendum on the Almond Board as well. We use the grower list for that. If you're a handler in the audience and you haven't submitted your grower list yet to Tony, she'll take it today. She starts asking for those in October, and typically we're trying to wrap that up here by December so that we can meet our election time periods, which will happen in the spring. So thank you to all of you who do this. I know it's just another thing to add on your plate, but we really, really appreciate it. And there is a way where you can just say if there's any changes from last year. That way you're not kind of reinventing the wheel each year. We do have this identified as a development priority for our handler portal. Hopefully in a couple years, if I'm giving this presentation, you'll be able to do this all through the handler portal. Again, trying to build out more functionality, make things easier on you so that you can do everything through the portal. Handler treatment plan. This is another thing that we will continue to add to the handler portal, but this is an annual plan. It's to be submitted to Sabrina, actually, by May 31st of each year. Remember, I talked about this a little bit at the beginning. It's how you're going to comply with the pasteurization rule. Really important here, once you have an approved plan, If you don't have a lot of changes year to year, it's as simple as really just filling out this first page, sending it, marking it no change to approved plan, sending it to Sabrina, and we really appreciate that. If you do have some changes, we ask you to, excuse me, update those and send those in so we can review those and approve those in advance of the crop year. There also is a verification that happens. We hire a third-party agency that comes out and does an on-site verification. Essentially, is just making sure that you're following the plan that you've submitted and that the Almond Board's approved. Here we go. I got a little ahead of myself. So again, a third-party agency comes out each year, typically in the spring, after things have died down a little bit, hopefully for you. We know not to come out during the busy fall season. And again, they will review some shipment records. If you have pasteurization that's on site, they're going to review any records of that. And they'll do a quick facility walkthrough, and we really appreciate you letting them come in there and do this verification. All right, handler treatment plans are due each year by May 31st. Who was paying attention? That is true. Yes, thank you again for submitting those. We really, really appreciate it. Okay, I've got a few more slides here. Other requirements. So these are not monthly, these are not quarterly, these are not annual. If you never do an interhandler transfer, guess what? You don't have to do a Form 7. Hooray, right? But if you do an interhandler transfer, we asked you would do a Form 7. So these are what we'd call ad occurrence type forms, or a lot of these things are ad occurrence types forms. We'll talk about Form 7s for interhandler transfers. We'll talk about inedible obligation. What is that? We'll talk about that. Form 8, that kind of goes with inedible obligation. We'll talk about that and InShow Credits as well. So Form 7. So here is a picture of the Form 7. What is a Form 7? It's the document that helps us to know when those almonds move from your handler to another handler, or from another handler to your handler. We don't know about that transaction unless you tell us, and this is the document where you tell us. And there's a few things on here. There's obviously the date of the transfer, there's a transferring handler, and actually what typically would happen is we'd ask that if you're the handler who's shipping product to a registered handler, first of all, we'd ask you just to make sure that the place you're shipping them is a registered handler, right? And that's really simple. You can go to almonds.com, look at our supplier exporter list. If their name shows up on that list, that means we've vetted them and they're an approved handler. If you're not sure, also encourage you to reach out to us. We'd be happy to help you decipher whether they are a registered handler or not. As a shipper, you're required, especially if it's unpasteurized, you're required to confirm that the place you're shipping it is a registered handler before you release that product. When you do release that product, we ask that you, the shipper, would start this process of the Form 7. So you essentially fill out everything down to that first signature line there. That's what we'd call Part A. You tell us the date of the transfer, where it's coming from, where it's going, the variety. You'd say whether it's pasteurized or not. And the reason why we need to know whether it's pasteurized or not, remember, this is a transaction or a shipment of almonds in North America. But in the pasteurization rule, if it's going to a registered handler, it does not need to be pasteurized. The burden to pasteurize it, if it goes to a North American market, will transfer from you to the receiving handler, right? They have the same rights as you do as a handler. So this is our way of knowing whether that burden needs to transfer or not. You can list multiple varieties on here if you want. So if you do like 3 or 4 loads and they're different varieties and you don't want to do 3 or 4 pieces of paper, that's fine with us. You can kind of total them up here if you'd like. We do want to know the kernel weight, and we do want to know whether it's been pasteurized or not, and then your lot ID. And then it's really small on the screen here, I apologize, but we'd ask that you say what you're retaining, and it says here these obligations, and there's a reserve. The Almond Board hasn't had a reserve in probably over 20 years, and so that probably doesn't really apply here. Administrative and advertising, so this is that admin and marketing portion of our assessments. Typically what will happen is either you'll keep all the assessment, meaning the pounds that you're transferring, you still want us to bill you for the invoice, or you want us to bill the other person. If you want us to bill the person who's receiving the pounds, you would say, I'm retaining none of the assessments, or none of the obligations. And then the Part B, we'd look for them to say they're assuming all. And I should mention too, if you're going to keep this Almond Board assessment and you want to just tack on 3 cents to whatever you're invoicing the person who's buying your almonds for, that's fine too. You guys can handle it that way. But this just helps us to know where these pounds should be included for invoicing purposes for us. Let's see here. Again, you can submit this through the fax if you'd still do faxing, or you can email it to Tony or myself in our office, and we'd be happy to help you as well. Okay, Form 7s, we just talked about these. They're required for almonds purchased directly from a grower. What do we think? False, right? Not from a grower, from another handler. Remember, inter-handler transfer, so handler to handler is what we're talking about when we're talking about Form 7s. If you receive it from a grower, it should be on, remember what we talked about, Form 1, that incoming receipt that we talked about at the very beginning of our time today. These Form 7s are really just for handler-to-handler transactions. Okay, this is a question I get all the time. What's an inter-handler transfer versus what's an industry purchase? And I realize there's a lot of different terminology I'm throwing at you here, and there's a lot of things that you're already having to keep square. So let's talk quickly about this, and I've got a few slides after this that will hopefully help us to kind of better decipher which one is which. Inter-handler transfer, what we always tell people is follow the money. Where is the almonds? Who's paying for the almonds? And what is that person you're paying for the almonds? So if you're paying another registered handler for the almonds that are coming inbound to your product, that most likely is inter-handler transfer, right? Because that means that the other handler had title to the almonds, and now you're buying title from another handler, therefore inter-handler transfer. Now, what if you're buying almonds from a broker, someone who's not a registered handler, not on our list, but they're not a grower either? That would be what we'd call an industry purchase. And so how do we figure out what's what? So let's run through a few scenarios here. Oh, and I should say here, this is where you'd claim those. I mentioned this earlier when we talked about the Form 25-1. Inbound industry purchases or inter-handler transfers received, you would claim that in the Form 25-1. Quickly, if you're the handler that's shipping the product out, meaning you're shipping to a handler down the road, you actually would add that to your total shipments for that month. So if I'm a handler and I shipped out 20,000 pounds of shelled almonds to another handler in the month of, December, on my December Form 25-1, I'm going to include an additional 20,000 pounds on my shelled outbound shipments because that 20,000 pounds is outbound to that other handler. All right, here's what I was talking about. So here's a little bit of a schematic, and hopefully this will help us to understand what's an inter-handler transfer versus an industry purchase. So everything in the orange color here is what constitutes the almonds and their movement. Everything in the green is money, right? So where's the money moving? So if the almonds move from handler A to handler B, and the payment goes from handler B to handler A, what would this be? Inter-handler transfer, right? This is your classic, I'm paying you, you're a handler, I'm paying you for your almonds, and you're shipping me those almonds I just paid for. Pretty cut and dry here, right? How about this one? This would be a different example. The almonds are coming from handler A, they're going to handler B, but handler B is not paying handler A for them, they're paying a broker. Well, this is an industry purchase. And you might say, well, why aren't the almonds coming from the broker? This is quite common. A broker is not a registered handler and therefore cannot hold unpasteurized product in North America. They can buy it, they can own it, and in this case, that's probably what's happened. They might have 50,000 pounds of almonds at a handler that's unpasteurized that they own, they have title to, but they are letting it sit at a handler. So that handler A in this example. So the broker says, hey, I sold it to handler B. Can you send my 50,000 pounds that's at your facility to handler B for me? And then they're going to collect the payment for it. So even though the almonds don't transfer, again, we're following the money more so than we're following the almonds in these examples. All right, here's another one. This is a little more complicated. The almonds go from handler A to handler B. Maybe there's some payment between B and A from handler, but there's also a brokerage fee perhaps. This would be an inter-handler transfer. Again, who has title? And probably most likely here, there's the title of the almonds would be in handler A, although a broker's kind of put the deal together. They charge some kind of brokerage fee. This would still be an inter-handler transfer. And then I think this is my last example, so thanks for sticking with me through this infographics here. Okay, here we go. Almonds are going from broker to a handler B, and the handler is paying the broker. This would be an industry purchase. Now, what did I say earlier about unpasteurized almonds, right? These almonds, if the broker has it at their warehouse, these should be pasteurized almonds, right? Because the broker should not have possession of unpasteurized almonds in North America. So you can see my note here on the bottom. Only treated almonds could be in a broker's physical possession in North America. So in this example, we're assuming this is a broker that has a load of pasteurized almonds sitting at a warehouse that a handler would like to buy back. That's what this example would show, and this would be an industry purchase. All right, well, hopefully that's as clear as mud, but if you have questions, again, reach out to us, we'd be happy to help. All right, I'm transitioning to a new topic now, and thank you for sticking with me here. Inedible obligation, you might have heard this term. What is an inedible obligation? What is an inedible? Well, an inedible is typically defined as, insect damage, mold, rancidity. It's stuff that on the incoming USDA has said that's inedible, right? And this is all driven from the incoming inspection. What you're looking at on the right-hand side of the screen here is what we call our quality report or quality control report. you can get your copy through the handler portal. So if you log in today, if you're a handler and you log in with your username and password, you can click on quality report and you can see your up-to-date version of what's on the right-hand side of the screen. And what you'll see on this example, or you might see, it's kind of small. This handler has this is an example handler, 8.8 million pounds of receipts. Of that, the total inedibles that have been scored by USDA are 113,000 pounds. Well, the 2% tolerance would be 176. So you might say, well, they only have 113,000 pounds that were scored as inedible, but they're allowed, and the tolerance is 176. Why does it show a 4,000 pound inedible obligation? Because really what we're looking at is column 2 here, total inedibles, subtracted from column 3, and the difference would be your obligation, or what you're required to dispose of. Well, the reason is because we calculate this by variety. So even though as a handler, on average, they're under 2% inedible, which is the tolerance. So think of it like you're allowed 2%. If you go above that, then you accrue what's called an obligation, something you have to dispose of. Well, they're under that for most of their varieties, but look at in this example, look at Sonora. They have 6,400 pounds that were scored as inedible for their Sonora deliveries. Well, 2% of their total delivery pounds for Sonora is only 3,300 pounds. So the difference, about 3,100 pounds, would be an obligation. And so even though they're under 2% in the aggregate, they're not under 2% for each variety. So they accrue a small obligation in this example. So in this example, this handler has 4,000 pounds of what we would call inedible obligation. And that just simply means you have to dispose of that to a non-human consumption channel. And we have what's called accepted users. These are folks, and I'll have a slide on this in a second, but oil mills, people who are mixing into animal feed or feeding directly to livestock. And jumping back to the inedible obligation, so of this 4,000 pounds, half of it, or at the very bottom, what you see there, 2,044 pounds, half of that 2%, the obligation has to be true inedible. So when you dispose of it, you have to get rid of 4,087 pounds, and of that 4,087 pounds, at least 2,044 of it, or at least half of it, has to be scored as true inedible. Remember, the whole concept here is we're trying to remove an abundance of insect damage out of the marketplace, out of the human consumption channel. And so when you're doing the disposition, when you're getting rid of that product that's low grade, it's oil stock, we want to make sure that it actually is the inedibles that you're getting rid of, or at least half of it is. Got a few things here. You can see this is, in this example, this handler's already done 61,000 pounds of dispositions. They've already sent 2 loads to this is a fake example, Dairy R Us, right? Dairy R Us is feeding those almonds to their cows. So in this example, they only have 4,000 they have to get rid of. They've already done 61,000, so they're done for the year, right? They've already met their obligation, actually met and exceeded it. And then right here in this example, you can see of their 2 loads that they've shipped to Dairies R Us, 18 or 19,000 pounds of that was scored as true inedible, well and above the 2,000 pounds of true inedible that they were required. So in this example, you're seeing this handler is done. They can choose to dispose of more through accepted users, but they're not required to do anymore. Okay, if you want to get a copy of what we saw in that last slide, your quality control report, or your quality report, you simply go in the handler portal, you click quality report on the left-hand side, and it'll show you the current year and 1 year previous, or 1 year forward rather. And you can look at report 1, page 1 is the one you're going to look at primarily. All right, I'll wrap up here quickly, but a couple other things about this. It's really important when you do the disposition too. So remember, you're accruing, you're having incomings mostly in the fall months. And remember, our crop year runs August 1 through July 31. You have until the end of September. So from August 1st to the end of September, you can actually still do dispositions against your last year's numbers, right? So in this example, 8/1 of 20 to 8/1 of 7/31 of 2020 is what we would call the 2020-21 crop year. That was the last crop year. On August 1st of this year, we started the 21-22 crop year. Now, however, you can still do dispositions against the 2021 crop year up until the end of September. And actually, a lot of people choose to do this in the months of August and September because what will happen is if, in that last example I showed you where they had 60,000 pounds of shipments, only 4,000 pounds of required, if they did that disposition, or actually I'll use the numbers on this slide. Let's say I'm a handler and I want to do 30,000 pounds I want to send to Dairies R Us again. And if I do that any time between 8/1 and 7/31, and I only have 20,000 pounds of obligation, the extra 10,000 pounds, it's great, but it doesn't get me anything. If I wait till after August 1st when the new crop year started, and I do that same 30,000 pound disposition, it'll take care of the 20,000 pound inedible obligation I had in the last year, and then the extra 10 will be applied to the year that we're now in. So that's why you see a lot of dispositions done in the months of August and September. It's typically the busiest disposition time period. And most accepted users, which again are the folks who are buying these almonds, are used to that, and and that's where they usually will buy the almonds during that time. Again, if you have questions, send us a note. We'd be happy to help. All right, here we go. We're getting back to my comment earlier. Pop quiz. If a handler's average inedible percentage is under 2%, they will not have an inedible obligation. What do we think? False, remember? That's the example I just showed you. Remember, that handler that we looked at had under 2%, but it's each variety has to be under 2%. And the example we looked at, his Sonoras and I think one or two other varieties were under 2%, so they had a slight inedible obligation. All right, quickly here, inedible disposition. This is just the paperwork you submit when you do a disposition. And remember, a disposition is just simply a shipment of non-human consumption almonds to an accepted user. The accepted users are either crushing it in for oil, they're mixing into feed, or feeding directly to livestock. It's really important you let us know 72 hours prior to the disposition before you schedule the disposition. You've got to have a USDA inspector on site to observe the disposition happening. They're going to give you what's called an inedible note sheet. You're also required to get a weight tag. So when you do a disposition, make sure you get a tare weight and a gross weight and a net weight. Make sure you send in a copy of your total certified weight. And you can email that to Tony or send it to our compliance fax. You would actually fill out Part B of this as well with the information from those, the weight cert and the note sheet. And then you would send us a copy and then send a copy to your accepted user you sold to. They complete Part B once they actually use the almonds and they crush it into oil or whatever they do with it. So where do the almonds go? I mentioned oil mills is one. Here's an example of some oil mills. Got some cold press, some warmers, some warm expellers here on the bottom. They go to animal feed, right? We've got a lot of animals to feed in the state, and so they'll go to that and they get mixed into feed. Or in some cases, you actually can send them to the dump if you'd like. You can get credit for what we call refuse or landfill. You can disc them into the ground, you can send them to the dump, you can dump them on the ground. When you do a refuse disposition, the Almond Board is acting as your accepted user, so just make sure you schedule with us accordingly. Make sure that we're there to observe these ones. There's a lot of information on this slide. You probably, when you do a disposition, you'll just want to call us if it's your first one. But essentially, like I said, you tell us 72 hours ahead of time. You make sure that you've got an inspector who's going to be there on site. You get a weight tag, and you complete Part A. If you have any questions about this, email Tony. She's great. She'll help you through this process, or any of us will. Sometimes it can feel a little daunting when you're doing it for the first time, or maybe it's been a while since you've done a disposition. I just encourage you to reach out to us. We'll help you. That's our jobs. We're here to help you, and we'd be happy to do so. All right, handlers cannot ship unpasteurized almonds to an accepted user without a Form 8. What do we think? Remember I said there's a lot of rules about where you ship unpasteurized almonds in North America. Can they be shipped to an accepted user without a Form 8? Or cannot, sorry. They cannot, right? So you can, sorry, this is worded backwards. I should have reworded this. But you can ship unpasteurized almonds to an accepted user, but they must be on a Form 8, because that's telling us you're shipping it as an inedible disposition, and therefore it's only to be used for non-human consumption, right? Handlers are required to give 48-hour notice to the Almond Board in advance of any scheduled inedible disposition. Remember, what was the number? Was it 48? No, 72, right? So give us 3 days if you can. So again, you can email Tony, she's our gal, or you can email me as well if you want. All we're gonna wanna know is when it's happening, because sometimes we will come and observe the disposition happening. So we ask for 3 days heads up, just so if we are gonna be there, we can put it in our schedule. If we're not there and you've already told us about it, carry on. You don't have to wait for us. If you've told us about it, that's all you're required to do. At that point, you can carry on, provided you have your inspector there on site. What items are required for completion of an inedible disposition? Well, a few of these, right? Your Form 8, remember we talked about that? That was the Part A, Part B form. Your weight cert, make sure you get your weight cert, and the inedible note sheet or certificate. All right, quickly here, InShow credits. So you might say, well, I ship a lot of InShow, and how do I get rid of the inedibles? I mean, I can't sort the inedibles out of my InShow loads that go out, so how does that work? Well, you can actually, if you do InShow shipments, you can submit what's called InShow credits, and you can get a prorated version of credit against your inedible obligation for the inedibles that you're shipping out with your InShow loads. It's just a simple Excel chart that we send you right now. In the future, we'd like to automate this with the handler portal. It's not currently. Again, because of the tolerance is 2%, a lot of handlers, if the crop's coming in pretty clean, don't have a lot of obligation right now, so you may not even have to do an InShow credit. But if you do a lot of InShow and you find yourself having a hard time meeting your Inedible obligation, send an email to Tony. It might be as simple as filling out some InShow credits for your InShow loads, and that might help you get under your Inedible obligation. A couple other things here. There are some other programs that I just don't have time to cover off on today. We have some other trainings that we have for this. You can send us an email and we can schedule a virtual or on-site training. One of them is the pre-export checks program. Remember, this is our program for shipments to the European Union, and it's for aflatoxin testing here, and there's a sampling plan and a number of things associated with that. Sabrina's your gal for that. You can send her a note, send us a note, and we'll be happy to schedule you a training for that. The Almond Sampling Verification Program is actually a USDA or a state CDFA program, but remember I said all almonds that come in from a grower to handler have to be incoming inspected. Well, this is the way that you can actually get your staff, your handler personnel staff, trained to be able to sample. That way you're not paying an inspector to essentially probe each bin when it comes in. You can become what's called an ASVP designee. It's essentially a trained person, and you can actually get one of your leads on your staff trained as a proctor. So that way, you know, they get trained and therefore they can train the rest of your staff as you bring them on if you have any seasonal staff for the harvest. A couple other things, I've talked quickly about this, and these would be areas where Tim or Judy in the back would be your people, but direct verifiable user program. So I mentioned in the pasteurization rule, you can only ship unpasteurized almonds outside of North America. There's a couple caveats to that. Again, one we already talked about was to an inedible or an inter-handler transfer to another registered handler. Another one we talked about was to an accepted user for not for human consumption. I mean, you know, it can be unpasteurized, it's going to get crushed into oil, or it's going to be fed to an animal. But another exemption to the pasteurization rule is shipments to what we call a direct verifiable user. What is a direct verifiable user or a DV user? This is someone who has a treatment in-house that's been approved and is validated. So think of like someone like a Hershey's who might have their own roasters. They have what's called the DV user number, and you as a handler can release unpasteurized product to them provided you reference their DV user number and make sure that it's current. So if you have questions about that, email Judy or give us a call and we'll get you in there. There is a list, a DV user list that's in the handler portal under reference material. It's also on the Almond Board website as well. And then lastly, custom processors also has to do with pasteurization. But this would be if you have a load, maybe you've never shipped domestically before, and you've got a load that's coming up that you know is going to be a domestic load and you don't have pasteurization in-house. You're like, what do I do? What do I do? Well, there's a host of companies that will offer toll processing for you. So they have TERP or Technical Expert Review Panel approved pasteurization technology. You can pay them a fee and they'll pasteurize it for you. We call those entities custom processors. You can see the list of those that are approved by the Almond Board in the reference materials section of the handler portal or on the Almond Board website as well. It's a little bit varied, but send us a note if you can't find it and we will get to you. Again, it should also be reference material of the handler portal. Speaking of reference material, I'm going to plug it one more time here. Again, if you are looking for something that you're like, I know the Almond Board has this, they've sent it to me before, I just don't know where it is, check the reference material section out first. You can always email us and we'll send it to you, but it might be here, and then, then you might get it right away, and that might be helpful if you're in a time-sensitive situation. In the handler portal, when you're logged in, all the way at the bottom on the left-hand side is reference material, and it's essentially just a listing of a whole bunch of PDFs, fact sheets, backgrounders, all kinds of just useful information. Check that out if you haven't before. I think you'll find it useful, hopefully on a variety of different topics. So there you go, animation. All right, you guys made it with me. Thank you. We don't have much time. If there are questions, I'll take some. I also want to just highlight a few of the folks that mentioned. Again, you've met Sabrina. Here's Sabrina's email address. My name's Bryce. You see my email address here. And Tony Arellano, who a lot of the stuff, her email address is here as well. Or just call our office, and we'll be happy to help you. If there are questions, I'll take some. If not, I totally get it. It's a lot of information. I encourage you, if you have staff or you know someone who wasn't able to attend today, as was said earlier, they're going to make the presentations available, I believe, January 3rd. So you can watch it by then, or this PDF of this presentation will be available next week, or I can send you one if you want. So I really appreciate you guys getting up and being with me today. And hopefully you learned something. If not, again, we just appreciate you being here. And I can't say it enough. Every time I get an opportunity to talk to industry members, thank you for all you do every day. I realize what we're asking you to do is an above and beyond of what you also have to do with all your other duties at your operation. So we really do appreciate you helping us fill out these forms, submit these things on time. It really means a lot to us, and we'd be happy to return the favor and help you if there's any way we can. So thanks for your attention today, and with that, I'm done.
Well, thank you so very much, Bryce, for that presentation. And I'd also like to just recap on what Bryce has just mentioned, is that we appreciate all that you do out there as a handler and during these difficult times. And yeah, I applaud you, and we all applaud you here at the Almond Board for all the hard work that you have done. Just some closing comments before we leave this session today. We have at 10 o'clock, beginning at 10 o'clock, we have the Food Safety and Quality Roundup in Ballroom B3. Following, there's also other sessions as well if you'd like to attend those. We have a review of meeting disruption and options and incentives for California almond growers in Ballroom B4. And India, exciting growth in the largest export market, Ballroom B3, or I'm sorry, B7. And then also there's another session, sweet results from the sugarless snack in Ballroom B10. And before and after later sessions begin, feel very welcome to grab a cup of coffee or refreshment, sponsored by SATEC, in the pre-function of Ballroom B. Also, I encourage you to find some time to visit the Almond booth over in the Exhibit A hall. There you can find some of our latest and greatest resources and learn more about the Almond Board marketing programs, as well as be entered into a chance to win a Thor-powered gift package as well. Very exciting to have Thor behind the Almond Board in this conference. Also, I'd like to thank you as well once more for attending the Handler University this morning. It's early to come on in, but I appreciate you all for joining us as well, and hopefully you've learned a little bit more about what the Industry Services and Marketing Order Department has to offer at the Almond Board. Once again, enjoy your conference and have a great day. Thank you. Also, if you have any questions for the speaker, Bryce Fleischer, you're welcome to come on up and to have those one-on-one conversations as well.